Well, actually, I'm really thrilled and honored to be here because I was looking forward so much, knowing I would learn a lot, not knowing exactly that I would learn about differential privacy, but I knew that I would learn a lot. So, because I don't work with research, and when I work with industry, it's just as a strategy consultant. So it's an honor to be here. But then, why do they let me up on stage here? My personal reflection would be maybe because I grew up in a lab. I grew up in a sort of an 80s, 90s makerspace where my father always had a room fully dedicated to electronics when I was a kid. And on the walls, there were all these little red boxes filled with diodes and stuff cables. And if you wanted to hang out with my dad, that's where you should be, soldering electronics and programming. So that's what I did. And I remember that the first time that I really loved it was when he allowed me to solder together an optical sensor with my cassette deck player in 1986. And anybody who came into my room could hear my recorded voice say, "Get out of here." And that made me feel awesome. Now, having that profile of interest and that sort of attitude, I guess you can figure how many friends I had. So as it turns out, when I got to use connected computers and dial-up, the world changed for me. The opportunity of talking, chatting, reaching out to people all over the world was changing everything for me to the extent that I was convinced, as teenagers can be, that this changed everything for me, so it's going to change the whole world around. And ever since that's pretty much been my main interest, working with and figuring out how does this thing, internet, change society. And by now I would say that we all agree that it does so. Digitalization fundamentally changes how we organize everything in society because it's not a department in the organizations where we work. It's not an industry where we have startups and consultancy companies. It's more of a new dimension that we have created for ourselves that's relevant everywhere, that impacts how we produce things, how we distribute them, how we consume what we actually consume, how we perceive things. I mean, clothes that for thousands of years have been these things that we use to regulate our bodies' temperatures and send some signals about who we are, suddenly can give us real-time feedback on what muscle groups are working hard and which ones should work a bit harder, acting like personal trainers. That kind of skews the perspective a bit on why we even wear them, right, and what they are. It also changes stuff like abstract things, such as what do we trust in a world where decisions are made by algorithms, or what is integrity in a world with a digital dimension, as we talked about previously. And a reflection I made is that if you would have talked to my grandfather's grandfather, it turns out that he wasn't allowed to walk from the village where he lived to another village unless he had signed papers from the priest showing that he had a reason to do that. Because if he did without a real reason, he could be put to jail, and that was not considered integrity problematic at the time. In Sweden, we're so used to seeing personal security numbers as sort of a rational foundation of an effective welfare state, right? Well, in Germany, that's illegal. You're not allowed to have the state run numbers, identifiers like that all across for understandable historical reasons. But it turns out that the concept of integrity is something that we fill with meaning in a cultural context, and that cultural context is changing. And now we're busy trying to figure out what is a functional concept of integrity in a world with a digital dimension. And we don't really know, but we do have some clues. We also see that this dimension changes so many experiences to us that it radically changes our expectations of things, and more so even in this generation that are now here among us, I would say, people who have grown up with this digital dimension, who take it for granted. Actually, I would say that millennials are the world's, humanity's first truly globalized generation ever. Having grown up not having to find their friends in the same classroom and on the same street only, but in a world where it's completely natural to find your friends all over the world, regardless if it's because you like the same YouTube star, or if you played the same computer game, or if you just engaged in the same pussy hat movement or something like that. It doesn't really matter. And that means that they are already very much showing that they prefer access over ownership in many, many ways, even in living. So soon we'll have as many co-working spaces in the world as there are Starbucks cafes. And now we have people applying that same logic to how they live. And we are all changing our expectations. I mean, seriously, is there anybody here who would still volunteer to adjust their evening and dinner plans to a TV program? Maybe during Olympics, otherwise not, right? Because we take this for granted. How many of you use these sort of personalized travel services, Google Maps, Waze, whatever? Everybody. Nobody at their right mind would today put themselves in a car and with open eyes drive into a stau, like where no cars are. You take turnarounds, right? Have you contemplated how fast this became just normal? It took just a few months for us because it radically removed barriers. It made something significantly easier for us, and we adapt extremely easy to that. So for a welfare state, just as any industry, there's an interesting situation now, that our expectations are changing rather fast on what is a good experience, on what is a good offer, right? And we can change behavior rather quickly when something dramatically makes our life easier, as we heard yesterday, or lowers risk for us. And it's not up to any industry nor the welfare state to dictate what is a good service, because our expectations always target the best experiences that we've had, regardless if it was Amazon, Google, or anybody else that gave us to us. So how is that going to work? And we understand that the areas in which we can provide this zero friction experience are more. So even in transport, for instance, we can and we understand that the transport system of the future needs to be fossil-free. It will be based on much more autonomous vehicles, but most of all, it will be based on offering us services that takes us from A to B in a frictionless way, combining bicycles with carpools, with public transport, right? And we can do that today with existing technology, no reason why not. But what needs to happen then is that the publicly owned companies that run public transport, they need to open up. They need to allow other people to build digital services, to be able to provide us with these services that can connect the cars and the carpools, etc. So that's a different thing than what they previously did. They can no longer dominate the offer or the service to us as consumers. And when that happens, we also see something else that's interesting. Who will then be in charge of the algorithms that make this happen, that decide the dynamic pricing of the trip or the dynamic pricing of the parking lots? How will that algorithm take into account, let's say, how much this trip impacts the environment? Maybe it should take into account the fuels that we're using, how many people are actually in the vehicle, and compared to how many people that vehicle could take. Or how do we design that algorithm so that not only rich middle-class people can afford to travel in high traffic hours, but also securing access to other people? So that opens up a whole new space of power, and either we simply wait for the platform companies to do that, and then for government and welfare states to try to regulate around it, or we start building in this function into public transportation right now, which I would actually prefer. And it's not only in transport, we can look at education or healthcare, and we see similar things. So telemedicine has only just begun. We heard Anna Fellender yesterday talk about values to consumers that we don't measure in GDP, time savings, lower risk. And I've heard health professionals say about this type of service, online doctor meetings, they can only take care of rashes and maybe if you have a bruise or something, but at the real hospital, then we can take care of, much more than that. And that's true. It's true. But if I have a rash or a bruise, and I need a doctor to check it out, then the waiting time to get there right now can be at least hours, maybe possibly even days. And when I look at this, it says waiting time 3 minutes. That's real value for me as a patient in need right now, right? And if we combine that with the explosion of new types of wearable health trackers, technology that we are inventing because the barriers are lower, they're cheaper, they're better, their performance is better, then we can do much more. So anybody in here that had children with ear infection? Always some, yeah. So you can relate, right? Sitting there in the evening with a kid that runs a fever, thinking, should we go again to the hospital, wait again with really sick people, or should we just stay home and let the kid suffer? But with this type of thing, you could diagnose an ear infection before on remotely, because it's just a camera in the ear, and that's real value. But what happens if we do this large scale? How do you organize primary care if it works like this? Because this service does not have to be within your region or municipality. It can be one center for the entire nation. Or wait, what would stop Tencent that runs WeChat, that already has telemedicine built into it, that already has doctor's appointment, from offering that to the Swedish market just like that? How difficult would it be for us to accept them? Well, as long as the doctor speaks Swedish, I assume that we would accept it rather quickly. So wherever we look, we're looking at experiences that are becoming individualized on a level that we could never do before, because it's possible when we automate things, because we lower the cost of adjusting the experience to you, be it precision medicine or whatever. And then as a whole, we can use this data to optimize on a system level. And it will impact the services that we get from the welfare state. Because what is the role of the welfare state? Well, basically, it provides us with services such as elderly care, healthcare, education. But then they run into problems. So when things are working well, it looks a bit like this. I can use this website, verksam.se, to start a company digitally. But they ask me to put in my business plan there, and seriously, that feels kind of weird. Why would the state want my business plan? I would feel more confident, and I would be happier to put it into a tool provided to me by my accountant that I'm already using, because it's my business system, and why should they care? Or should I be allowed to choose? Or here's an example of another service where if you live in Stockholm and you want to choose a school for your kid, this municipality of Stockholm or the city of Stockholm allows you to compare schools. That's very nice, very convenient for me. I live in Stockholm. I have a lot of schools to choose from. But if I'm moving to Stockholm from Gothenburg, then perhaps it would make more sense to see this kind of information in the context of Hemnet, where I start to figure out, what house do I want? Let's see, how far are they from schools? Is that a good school or a bad school? So how I want to consume a service or information will depend on context, who I am, why am I doing this? And you know, the welfare state can provide us with these services to a certain extent, but I mean, you see the problem. These services are becoming more, our demands are rising. Or let me put it another way. If you are a health tech company and you're making innovations to the Swedish market, you have a problem on the home market. We have no home market. And the problem you are facing is not negotiating with 21 regions. The problem is that you have 1,600 integration points in Stockholm region alone, and that kills your business. So there is no point trying to offer this product to the market right now. And this is a problem for us as citizens, because it slows down the rate in which we can get the services, the zero friction services that we expect. So one big challenge for the welfare state is scalability and speed, how to be able to provide us with these. And therefore, the role of the welfare state is no longer only providing services, but actually, very literally, enabling ecosystems of services to be built by the world, preferably. And that's why we have these buzzwords, city as a platform, government as a platform, because the success of a welfare state today will depend a lot on how successful they are at managing to get information flows to work in society between these different services. And that's why I think that Estonia is quite an interesting example, because they have their X-Road example, their X-Road system. They took a nationwide approach to this, and they combined legislation with technology. So here's one law that you have in Estonia. If a public authority has gathered some piece of information from you as a citizen, no other public authority can ever ask for that again. They must go to the source and use it, making things more efficient. Then they also have laws mandating not what technical implementation of a platform you do go wild. Every authority, municipality can choose their own, but they always have to sign up to a national catalog service showing what APIs and what services are available, and doing so in a structured way that makes it easy and not so costly to access and use those services to build something else. And they are also allowing that for companies, naturally not on the same level. They can't use the same services or to the same degree of accessing data, but they're part of this system too, and they're using legislation to make this happen. So from my point of view, what we know now is that in a world with a digital dimension, how successful we are has a lot to do with how good we are at extracting and refining the raw material of our time data. And that has to do with how good we are at building the infrastructure for that. And that's not the broadband only, it's the technical and semantical interoperability, because, well, you're computer scientists. How many of you would bet that we're looking at a future with fewer systems? Or explosions of systems? So for the welfare state, this is a crucial question on how to be able to make this happen. And the ability to change, regardless if you're private or public sector, is the most important competitive edge. And we heard that from Jan Bosch yesterday. The ability to take these new technologies and turn them into reality is crucial. Which brings us to the next big challenge: how to organize for that in a world where, you know, we've been quite successful in building very efficient silos. Departments in big companies, municipalities in the country, they have autonomy, they make their own decisions, they're quite efficient. But, you know, what happens is that most of the benefit we need to find right now and we need to build runs across sectors. So if you just came to Sweden as a refugee, right now you have to be in contact with 10 primary authorities and 14 secondary authorities. Similar situations can be seen if you're a person with multiple diseases. How does that play out in reality? How is that effective? Or let's say that if you are a company and then you have to talk to the finance inspection and provide them with information that you just gave to the tax authorities, that you just gave to another authorities. For this person, it's all just the state. And it's a state that's not working, just as we as consumers expect companies to recognize us when we call their call centers, etc. So that just needs to work. And for that to happen, we need leadership. We need leadership that sort of dares to address these somewhat technical issues in order to provide citizens with the services that we expect and need. Because groups of people with a lot of vested interests, let's say, like Sara Riggare, she's a researcher, she works with Parkinson's, she is also a Parkinson patient. They cannot wait. They really need this. And I think that sometimes what hinders us from having the leadership we need might be fear. For instance, fear of the problem of integrity. But that fear is not always the fear of the recipient or the citizen. So here's an interesting study I found related to data and privacy. 8,000 people in the world from countries as different and varying as the democracy neighbor Norway and Saudi Arabia got the question, and this is data where we don't want differential privacy because it does matter that it's my data and not somebody else's, but it's also super sensitive data about my health. So the question was, do you think that you should have full access to your health data or limited access or no access at all? And then you see the yellow bars here, varying from 82% to 92%, regardless if you're a citizen of Norway or Saudi Arabia, say, I want full access, please. But then you see all these purple stuff. That's the health professionals. Also saying that, giving the same answer, regardless if they work in Norway or Saudi Arabia. Between 60 and 74%, they say you should have limited access. So, you know, who's really afraid right now? Not necessarily the people who need these services. And we know that we can solve, by addressing security, but also using legislation, we can do some interesting things. So what Estonia did in their solution is that, yes, they have health data collected for all their citizens, but they take all the changes done in the health records, and they put that on a blockchain-based ledger, and they make that ledger available to each individual. So every citizen in Estonia have a real-time view of all the data that the state has about them, and also get real-time access if somebody changed it. And there's legislation saying that if you are a doctor and you are using your possibilities to access health data when you are not treating this person, well, then you can lose your right to be a doctor. In Sweden, we know that what happens here is that both nurses, they log in as doctors just to be able to do their job on a regular basis. So who really has the better protection, an Estonian citizen or a Swedish citizen? It's so important to address these things at speed, because if we get the services that we expect or not, if they are given to us in a manner that cultivates integrity and that gives us this transparency that makes us secure or not, has an impact on the trust that we have in the welfare system. And we need to use all these possibilities to create better welfare, to continue to increase health, longevity and education, but we need to do it in a way that cultivates trust. And we've touched upon this topic today, but I really, really think that algorithmic accountability is important. It does not mean that all algorithms can be, publicly published. That's not the point, but it is fair to say, I think, that a national audit authority should have the task of at least auditing the algorithms used for decision making in the public sector, right? So that's one example that we need to define new tasks for parts of authorities. But I also think that we can work a lot with transparency, because transparency also has to do with another part that carries a lot of weight in terms of trust, and that has to do with real participation. Now, anybody working with the innovation process knows that including real users in the innovation process is key to getting quality in the ideas. Anybody who works with product development knows that including the real customers is key to getting quality in the new product ideas. Otherwise, you tend to come up with things that we as engineers love and that wonder why nobody else really wants them. So it's very important to do that. And we have seen some forerunners doing interesting things. For instance, Iceland have for a long time systematically involved their citizens through digital platforms, mixing with physical meetings, etc., in coming up with ideas on what they need to do, and that has had a big impact even on regulation in that country. So what I believe is very good is that in Sweden we are actively pushing and working with living labs, for instance here in Gothenburg related to transport. But I'm also very happy to see that the Swedish government is interested in finding a way of systematically pulling the insights from these living labs up to policy, so that we can have a systematic approach in getting more agility in terms of policy making. And I think that's really fantastic. And I think that the government's strategic innovation partnerships programs are key to that. Because why this is important is not just because it will be nice for us to get better services. It is because what is happening is that the speed of change is so fast right now that we are looking at one of the biggest challenges for a long time. So the only risk of digitalization that occasionally keeps me awake at night is this one. The differences are increasing now in opportunity. The individuals capable of using this change for themselves, learning, keeping up, making innovation happen, etc., and the opportunities for those who do not have those skills, who do not have those networks, who do not have those opportunities. The difference between the organizations, companies, cities who have the ability to change, to take these new technical possibilities and turn them into improved citizens, improved products, improved business, and those who do not have that ability. Those differences are also increases in terms of actual growth, in terms of actual profitability, and I am convinced that the same is true for nations. The welfare states that are capable of enabling ecosystems to get the best possible service to their citizens, and those who don't. The welfare states who are capable of balancing and working with tools such as openness, transparency, accountability, and getting a home market that works for all these new digital innovations, and those who can't. Those differences will also increase, and that's why this is my biggest concern, and those will even increase. So I wonder, for those people who are the world's first globalized generation, who have the opportunities already of a global work market, what will the welfare state look like? How do we handle the question of what welfare services need to look like in a world where everybody is part of a globalized generation? We don't have the answer to that. We don't have the answer of where to even get the money for that when we see value accumulation turning out the way it does in a winner-takes-it-all for the few companies that really take platform position. And these are difficult questions that we need to handle. And I know that my time is up, but I can't help saying this because I'm in an industry place, just as a provocation. I even think we need to start thinking about where growth comes from. Also, I'm not saying industry is not super important, but seriously, how much digital consumption do you think the world can take? Do you think we're sort of done now that we invented Spotify and YouTube? Or do you think we've only just started? And if you think these companies are all about play and not serious, I would say this is one of the Swedish companies. They made 3 billion kronor in their first 5 days of launching their new product in gaming. This is real industry, it's real money, it's real value on a global market. Growth will not only come from industry, and we need to start taking these seriously. So just to sum things up, there are major challenges for the welfare state. We need to be able to give our citizens zero friction experiences. We need to do that at scale and speed. We need to find the organizations that in a systematic ways increases agility, even up to policy. We need to cultivate trust in doing that through daring to be open, through working with things like algorithmic accountability. And we need to start seriously addressing the inequalities we're looking at from a global perspective, because digitalization is driving that, and that's the only thing that scares me. So what do we need to do? Strengthen data ownership for individuals, build these information infrastructures. There's a lot to be done on standardizing the service APIs within the welfare sector. We need to work with openness, and we need to have explorative action in everything we do, including users and learning from each other. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Darja. My first question would be, are you staying over the coffee break? Are you staying?
Yeah, I'm leaving after lunch.
Okay, brilliant. Because I think that gives a lot of people here the opportunity to come up and speak to you, because I'm sure there's a lot of questions. And they can also, of course, talk to you on Twitter, because you're one of our main Twitterers. Not just for that, but for a brilliant speak, I'm handing you over some chocolate. Thank you again.
Thank you.